Here's your smart fact of the day. There are many statements that you can interpret in a variety of ways, right? So if I look at the statement to play well is to win, you can interpret it like, okay, which means that if you play well, that means you're winning. Or you can say, oh, it's just the act of playing well, which is winning by itself. And I'm going to actually explore a statement called the exception that proves the rule, which is interpreted in 5 different ways on Wikipedia. What does that mean? It means basically that if you have a rule of sorts, if there is an exception to it, it actually kind of proves the rule. I use this statement a lot with my classes, and I thought I'm going to explore 2 aspects of this statement, the exception that proves the rule. One, in managing our day-to-day life, and the second is if you're marketing something. So let's go. So before you think that this professor has lost his mind and is now started analyzing sentences, trust me, there is a lot of value that you can actually get out of paradoxical statements like this. So the exception that proves the rule is a very interesting sort of statement because you can say that it's factually true. You can actually look at a rule, for instance, a rule in, let's say, marketing, or a rule in business, or a rule in life, or a rule in science, or a rule in languages, and say, oh, no, but that, let's say, this verb is an exception to the rule when you're learning the French language. And unless and until we understand the exception and understand that the exception is not the rule, but the exception is actually proving the rule, we kind of, are missing something in life. Okay. So what am I yaddering about? This episode, what I wanted to focus on is something that really struck me about the statement, and I've been pondering about it for quite a bit. I thought I'll kind of explore it in 2 angles. One is an angle which we need to be aware of, and the second is an angle that we can use as well, right? So let's first talk about what am I meaning as far as the exception that proves the rule. Now, if I look at social media, and yes, this is where I'm taking this particular statement, and I think that this is very useful for us to remember whenever we are browsing through social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it is Facebook, whether it is, anything, LinkedIn, whatever your poison is. One of the things that we must understand is that all news that we get, right, whether it's on social or whether it's digital or whatever it may be, is driven by the fact that it's an exception. I mean, you're not going to say, oh, the day was normal and the day progressed without incident and it's news, right? Human beings are very clearly connected to a sense of survival and a sense of looking out for bad news. And most news is bad news. I remember there was a newspaper called Good News America or something which shut down because it was just giving good news and no bad news. And I don't think that the nature of news is such that we are looking towards, a good news. Of course, I mean, if Virat Kohli wins some match against Pakistan or whatever it may be, then that's a different story. But the exception that proves the rule is a statement that comes very handy when we are looking at news itself. Because what we notice whenever we are going through social media, or whether it is digital or print or whatever you want to call it, it is the exception that we are reading, which means that the rule is there and it's hidden. And I think unless and until we understand both cases, like, okay, this is the stock market is down today or whatever, which means that the stock market has been reasonably stable on all the other days that the newspaper has not talked about. I think it becomes a very critical balancing perspective for us to understand that the exception that is what I'm reading right now, it's not the rule that I'm reading, and the exception is proving the rule. So you will get a bit of balance in your perspective. Is this making sense? It is certainly changing the way in which I'm consuming news. And I think that we all need a filter when it comes to consuming news or consuming advertising or whatever it may be. So that's the first use of this statement, the exception proves the rule, that proves the rule. Here's the second one. Okay, and this I found really interesting. What I really thought was, okay, let's look at the field of marketing and let's look at, let's say, the fashion sector, and let's look at the way in which sustainability and a rise against fast fashion has come up, right? And I've started thinking about it and I realized that, okay, Gen Z seems to be like really at the forefront of fighting against polluting the planet and making sure that, we all live sustainable lives. So that's why there was a big backlash against fast fashion, like Shein and Zara and all of those became problematic to a lot of youngsters who were coming in and saying, okay, I don't want to contribute to a sweatshop. I don't want to contribute to something which is polluting the environment, stuff like that. So no, we are not going to look at conspicuous consumption and the rest of it. Now, if I look at all the hullabaloo that has happened about this on social media, you might soon realize that, again, in the first part, we spoke about how the exception that proves the rule comes very handy to understand this over here. It means that the rule is that people are buying fast fashion. It means that the rule is that people are actually living very normal lives. It is these exceptions that are actually putting their stuff out on social media. And now we're beginning to wonder whether they are, creating a trend. So it's very critical for a marketer to understand this. That, okay, just because somebody's saying, okay, this movement or that movement or whatever it is, doesn't mean that that movement has been accepted by the silent majority. It's quite likely that it's just starting. And yes, you need to keep an eye out for it. And yes, some movements can become very quick, very easily. But the exception that proves the rule comes very handy over here to have that perspective, even when you're marketing something or watching some trends or even looking at a sales call or trying to pitch in some data or some figures that, will make you look good. Don't look for exceptions. Also look at the hidden rule underneath it. However, having said that, here's an interesting way of looking at it too. If you look at the way in which entire families have been converting to, let's say, ethical meat consumption or maybe veganism, or choose the movement of your liking. Okay, I'm not making any comment on the movements themselves. I think a lot of them are worthy and principled and the rest of it. But if you see who is the mover and shaker within that group or within that family group that is actually making the difference, you'll soon realize, it's somebody who is strident enough within that family group who's making a difference, right? So if there are 4 members in a family, mom, dad, 2 kids, one of the kids is strident enough to talk for, let's say, veganism. And over a period of time, that really strong view percolates down to the family group and everyone becomes vegan, or the choices that you're making towards not polluting the environment go into the fact that the mother is very, impressed with the fact that we need to do something to save the planet. So when she goes out to buy groceries, she's making the changes. Right. So if you do a bit of research and ask entire families as to what their opinion on a certain movement is, like, let's say, saving the environment, you might get a very muted response that I don't really believe that the environment is getting damaged, etc. But you will see people who are purchasing, right? The exception, again, that proves the rule is the decision maker, right? Or is the influencer within that family unit. And so you might find that the purchasing behavior and what people actually think about the environment are at odds with each other. So a marketer might get confused. He'll or she'll look at the data and say, but people are saying that they don't really care too much about the environment, but then why are they not converting that into buying? And why is my competitor, who's giving more environment friendly options, actually buying stuff? And then you'll soon suddenly realize that, this is the exception that proves the rule over here, because it's the exception that is making everybody, including, the rest of the silent majority, fall in line. I hope you liked this specific episode of Smarter With Sid. Okay. I just thought that sometimes it becomes extremely important for us to look at paradoxical statements or quizzical statements and find practical applications for the same. So the exception that proves the rule is maybe this episode, which is the exception that proves the rule, because I don't think that I'm going to come up with too many of these, right? And most of them would be around the usual topics that I cover. But once in a while, hey, it'll be the exception that proves the rule. And hey, if you like this particular episode or this podcast, do like and subscribe. And also, I'm the traveling professor. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And hey, if you like podcasts like these, just go and check IVM stuff. It's wonderful, I tell you. On that happy note.